Healthcare and social services fraud is a nationwide problem. In Minnesota, federal investigators estimate that more than half of roughly $18 billion spent across several public programs have been lost to fraud.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined once again with Jeff Berkowitz with Public Affairs TV in Chicago. And folks, a lot of times Jeff and I try to have a bit of a theme so that the different things we talk about come together, but this week it's a little bit of a mismatch. But Jeff, I suppose as we look at what we're going to be talking about today, some of the big issues of the week, we might say the theme is mischief, because there's just a lot of mischief going on around the country. As we just heard Representative Jason Smith of Missouri, the House Ways and Means Committee chairman, talking about fraud, and he held a hearing on that earlier this week. But we'll also be talking about some of the mischief in our political system. Before we get to another bite of Chairman Smith, what is your overall take, let's say, on some of the issues of fraud that we will be going into?
Well, look, this is what we know, and in our government, there's not quite that check on fraud that exists in the private sector. People are always talking, oh, the private sector, there's all the fraud, and, the government is there and it's a perfect system. It's almost the reverse. But there's fraud in both places, okay? And you try to minimize it. There clearly are, we're not socialists, we're not communists, or we're not anarchists. So in a free market system that we have, we're going to have a certain amount of government. And when you have a certain amount of government, you're going to have a certain amount of fraud. All you can do is try to minimize it. Minimize it by limiting the government to where it's essential for the goals of government, number one. And two, have checks, have inspectors general, have U.S. attorneys, have law enforcement that's supposed to be able to monitor, ferret it out, and prosecute where appropriate.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to work. We do have auditor generals in the country, but nonetheless, we've had massive amounts of waste. And finally, thanks to some reporters like Nick Shirley, looking at the fraud in Minnesota, which we've all seen that, and now lately he's been out in California. The White House is getting on it and taking a look at what we have here with the Vice President is heading up the fraud task force. You can see here this from last week where they suspended 447 hospices where $600 million of fraud was going, alleged fraud going in California. And I think all of that was primarily in the Los Angeles area. So finally, we're getting some response from the government instead of just writing it off as the cost of doing business in government. Also, let me take another bite here from Mr. Smith, unless you want to have any other comment, where he kind of talks about some of the fraud that's been going on.
Look at the fraud convictions handed down just last week. A pharmacist in New Jersey was sentenced to prison for bilking Medicare $2.5 million for medication he never used and spent some of the stolen taxpayer funds on luxury vehicles. A Michigan surgeon was sentenced to prison for stealing $7 million in Medicare funds for mental health services that were never provided. In Miami, foreign nationals from Cuba are fraudulently billing Medicare millions of dollars for durable medical equipment that was never delivered to beneficiaries using their stolen information.
It's amazing, Jeff, that as the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee said in his opening statement for the committee, that we have these healthcare providers around the country fraudulently billing the government for services that they have never provided to, in many cases, patients who never existed. It's shocking.
Well, it shouldn't be shocking because, as I've said, there's, fraud has been around a long time, perhaps as long as government has been around. I would say. But to be fair, there's some fraud that goes on in the private sector as well. But look, what they're doing here is calling attention to major fraud. So in the one of the bites, he's talking about millions, the other is talking about 18 billion. And the federal government, until you get to the billions, you're going to say, well, let's focus on the big stuff. You'd like to get all the fraud out, but make sure it's big, make sure you go after it, and make sure you remove it. It's as simple or as hard as that. It tends to be a partisan issue. I mean, we're looking at fraud in California. It's a big state, so it's going to have big numbers on fraud. It's also a somewhat more lax state on enforcement. And because much of the government and people in government may be in cahoots with the fraudsters, they have somewhat of a vested interest in keeping the fraud going
Well,
and in
now I
not
think you're
ferreting it out.
hitting the bigger story behind the headlines there. It's not just that these government agencies are lax, because we had people in Minnesota saying, we were telling the story to people in power and they shut us down, the whistleblowers down. And I think the question is that has to be answered. Is there a money trail here from the fraudsters? Let's say, as an example, the Somalis that have been accused of fraud, is any of the money that they have been allegedly skimming in the billions of dollars, like $9 billion apparently, has any of that been going to anyone in high office, in that case in Minnesota? But what about California? What about in LA? Is that going
What about
to
Illinois?
political parties?
Excuse me. What about Illinois? Do you suspect Illinois is known? It's almost a specialist in fraud. Certainly, vote stealing goes back
Jeff,
100
that would
years
never
or
happen in
longer.
Cook County. Come on.
No, I mean, so it's a joke to think it wouldn't be happening here, where there's so much that we know of, and so little effort to ferret it out. The Democratic Party is tightly involved with making deals with people on the other side of the table when they're supposed to bargain, you know. And since they're so involved with the public sector unions, the Democratic Party, since they get so much support to hold office from the public sector unions, wouldn't it stand to reason they might go easy on the public
Yeah,
sector
but I don't think the
unions
public
in
sector unions
negotiations?
are necessarily behind this. It might be some of these nonprofit organizations that are getting funding, and they're the ones that are then using taxpayer dollars to fund political campaigns. So it's like I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Well, it's the same. It doesn't have to be public sector unions. I'm just saying, look where there are vested interests of government to look the other way, wherever that is, whether it's with the unions, whether others who are in government and are benefiting from that. Look where their vested interests coincide, and you'll find there's too little enforcement of our anti-fraud laws. That's all I was saying, Terry.
What ties into that is we also have, as people know, an election year. This is an election year. We'll be electing a new Congress, a new legislature in November. And what's happening also in Illinois, it's happened in Texas already, it's happening this week in Virginia, is efforts to goose the system by political parties to draw districts that would be favorable to the party in power. And we've seen that happening. First of all, it became a national story in Virginia, where we see a map. This is a map drawn by Democrats, where Virginia currently has 6 Democrat congressmen and 5 Republican congressmen. This new map would result in the Democrats getting every congressional race based upon the way the map is drawn, and the Republicans, I should say, they would get 1. Now, I used to live in Northern Virginia, and that red area there that you see that would be a Republican, that is a huge, massive land area. So they kind of just dumped those voters who were leaning Republican, kind of jumped there, but very close to D.C. Is where there's a lot of Democrat voters, because these people in the Northern Virginia area like myself, were not people who were native Virginians. You come there often to work in government or go to college or whatever, and you go on from there and maybe move back. But the true blue Virginians are more in the southern part, and this is what they're doing. I'm going to play a report we got from Newsmax, unless you want to comment beforehand.
Yeah, let me just say, look, to give people some perspective, this thing started, this drive toward redistricting midterm, which is what we're in, kind of started a year or two ago, maybe a year ago, in New York, in Texas, and it was bipartisan, Democrat and Republican, and doing it big time in Texas. And then California was catching up, doing it. So that was for Republicans. California, Newsom doing it big time for Democrats. And then the Republicans caught up a little bit. And then Virginia, which had a 6-5, pretty evenly divided state, almost becoming a purple state, something like 47% of the congressional vote was Republican, and they end up after redistricting with not 5 districts but 1.
Yeah.
How can that be fair? And then they end up with the new governor.
And we should say it has subsequently, yesterday, as we tape this on Thursday the 23rd, yesterday a lower court Virginia judge ruled the Democrats' effort on this map is unconstitutional. We'll have to see if a higher court judge overrules that. But let me play this clip to bring the audience up to speed on what we're hearing from Newsmax.
The Northern Virginia part of the Commonwealth, it was carved up like a turkey in order to eke out a 10-11 advantage in the congressional map for the Democrats. Now, it was a close race on election night, and now the RNC suing, labeling the map a blatant power grab. So the question here for judges to weigh is whether the spirit and the letter of the Virginia Constitution were violated by this rewrite in the middle of the decade. And here's what some conservatives are arguing here.
Virginia literally had the fairest maps in the nation. They had a 6-5 map, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. In terms of proportional representation, they had the fairest map in the nation that was drawn, by the way, by an independent commission that the voters asked for just a few years ago. Now they will have the least fair maps in the nation.
So as we heard there, the claim is that they already had the best districted map in the nation, and then they would go to a worse map. So the thing is, Jeff, we're going to be talking also, this is going on in Illinois, but I didn't know if you wanted to follow up with a comment on Virginia before we go to Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was an extremely close vote. It almost didn't pass. Republicans, for some reason, were outspent more than... We should say, by the way, close vote,
extremely close vote on whether or not they should redistrict, right?
Right. It was, it was 3 million votes. I think it was like a 60 to 70,000.
Yeah, it wasn't like there was a groundswell to say, please, legislature, redraw the districts.
The new governor ran as a moderate, and she's turned out to be quite the liberal. And so a lot of people already have buyer's remorse on that. And they took some of that out on her here. So a lot of Democrats who might generally be thought to be partisan kind of looked at this thing and said, this is way too partisan for me. We as a state went to a lot of trouble to get a very fair system to redistrict, and then they brought this crud upon us. No, they weren't. A lot of them were not buying, even though they were Democrats, which was good to see. Some people are, being above just doing partisan politics and actually thinking of what was the public good. The public good folks almost won. Would have been quite refreshing.
That would have been refreshing, but as I said earlier, it's mischief is the theme, and there's a lot of mischief to go around in the political system, including in Illinois. And I'm going to play a clip here from State Representative Dan Ugasti. He had a press conference earlier this week with fellow Republican representatives Ryan Spain and Amy Ellick on the Democrats' efforts to not only redistrict, but to basically what they're talking about here is the Democrats want to pass a constitutional amendment. Now, that's something that the folks in Illinois would have to approve in November. And the Republicans are saying, please, voters, when the Democrats put this out, do not vote for it. The Democrats are trying to change the standards by which political districts are drawn. Now, they're pretty much ignoring the district the way they're drawn anyway, because they're supposed to be compact. And anyone who looks at the political boundaries in Illinois, they are anything but compact districts. The 13th Congressional District stretches across from East St. Louis up to Urbana-Champaign like a snake, so it is hardly compact. Same thing the way it's cut up around Chicago and Cook County. But let's, what Ugassi is saying is that if the Democrats have their way and pass this constitutional amendment, they will be enshrining basically a bogus map system to where Republicans would never be able to come back in an election because the politicians are picking the voters rather than the other way around.
Let's be clear. Even before this latest proposal from Speaker Welch and House Democrats, the political maps in Illinois were the worst in the nation. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the Democrats are now pushing House Joint Resolution Committee Amendment 27 or 28. You pick the one. They file both. We don't know which one's coming forward, but they're pretty much the same. And what are these? Nothing short of the most blatant attempt to rig the system and permanently enshrine Democrats' supermajorities through a constitutional amendment.
You know, you can't have supermajorities of 78 to 40 in the House and 40 to 19 in the state Senate, and you have a Democratic governor to boot, and you have a Democratic Supreme Court to boot. All those people, all the Democrats who wring their hands and, oh, it's so terrible what Trump is doing, and oh, it's so terrible to have a king and so forth. Oh my God. I mean, look, I've knew J.B. Pritzker, who was kind of a nice guy when he came in, and now he's the king. He's a king. There's no democracy in Illinois, and that's what they're doing. Because they know this is going to change someday, maybe in 4 years. Not immediately, but it can't get any worse. And so they did this on Amendment 1. They enshrined crummy labor standards and made them worse and put them to some extent in the Constitution. And now they're trying to take crummy redistricting standards or barely thoughtful and effective standards and make them worse because they see this change coming. So they're trying to put this in the Constitution.
Let me insert
There's
here
no
a little-
defense. There's no defense.
some language here because
There you go.
the standards for drawing districts have been the same ever since 1970 when Illinois passed its current constitution. And it says, just to take some notes here, it says, Democrat leaders argue the change is necessary because they fear the U.S. Supreme Court may weaken or eliminate parts of the Voting Rights Act, especially protections against diluting minority voters. And they say the amendment would preserve minority representation even if the federal protections fall. Now, the Republicans are saying that this would weaken compactness and contiguity, pushing them to the bottom of the priority list. It makes partisan gerrymandering easier, not harder, and it locks in one-party control by allowing the oddly shaped districts justified on racial representation grounds. And I would also note, Jeff, that I bet 99% of the voters in Illinois haven't even heard about this. You and I talking about this may be the first time they've even heard of this issue because
Right.
it's under the radar of most people.
Someday somebody's going to come up with a creative lawsuit. They always say Republicans say they're not activist enough. In our U.S. Constitution, we have a guarantee to the states of a republic, of a Republican form of government with a small r, not Republican. Okay, this in Illinois is not a Republican form of government. It's an oligarchy. It's a dictatorship. It's silly. He doesn't. Chris Welch is supposed to be a lawyer. He went to law school. I think he practiced law. Does he not know the U.S. Constitution overrides anything in the state constitution? If there's a conflict, the U.S. Constitution prevails. And if the Supreme Court construes the U.S. Constitution in a certain way, you can't stop that by passing this kind of, even putting it in the Illinois Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution takes precedence over the Illinois
the supremacy
Constitution.
clause of the U.S. Constitution. And Jeff is a graduate of law school, and I would say that's what struck me, that where they're saying here, the Democrats are saying their justification is in case the U.S. Supreme Court removes some of these standards, that they want to have this in writing here. But again, if the U.S. Supreme Court rules, you can't undo what the U.S. Supreme Court is going to do by passing a state constitution. It's the U.S. Supreme Court that has the final say on this.
There are so many problems that the Illinois legislature has created, and to the extent they didn't create, they don't try to solve. High taxes, the highest in the state, property taxes, income taxes, sales, not the highest in the state, the highest in the country, the highest property taxes in the country. Some of the worst schools across the state. In fact, only 40% of our public school students read at grade level across the entire state. That is not a good number.
No, I mean,
Okay.
there's
Why
so
don't-
many
why don't
problems.
they do something about-
and they're playing
Why don't
politics.
they do something?
Yeah, focus on
Yes.
education. Focus on economic development. What are you going to do about property
Right.
taxes you mentioned? We're driving businesses and citizens out of the state and taking their money and their spending with them, which damages the Illinois economy. There's so many things they
Precisely.
should be focusing on instead
Precisely.
of these political games.
Yeah, I mean, really, if Chris Welch wants to do something useful, start looking at black schools where you have 10 to 20% reading at grade level, where you have 30 students in a school where there should be 900, and if it's not, it should be shut down. I just could tick it off just like that. I could tick off 30 things that the Democratic Party, with their supermajority in the Illinois legislature, should be doing and aren't doing. And the Republican Party should be highlighting them every day so they could become less of a minority party.
I think they are making an
Mhm.
effort. I see
are.
the Republicans, at least in the House,
Well,
are
you
having
guessed
more
it.
of a media outreach that they ever
Right.
had before.
They are.
The other big issue,
Yeah,
Jeff,
that's
and
good.
it's not just in Illinois, is Iran. And the president, as we are taping this on Thursday, the 23rd, just had a meeting inside the Oval Office. I want to play a clip here where a reporter, it's a little hard to hear the reporter, but he's saying, here the citizens, what are they getting out of this? They're getting higher gas prices. Here's what the president said.
More on gasoline for the foreseeable
For a
future.
little while. And you know what they get
Well, how
for
long?
that? You know what they get for that? Iran without a nuclear weapon that's going to try and blow up one of our cities or blow up the entire Middle East.
Have 23?
So there you
Okay,
go.
good.
The president says that what we're getting out of it is we're getting an Iran that doesn't have a nuclear weapon and can't be dropping a nuclear weapon with those missiles that now have long range on cities like London, Paris, and places in Germany, or in the Middle East. And the halting nuclear proliferation has long been a policy of the United States government. Certainly, we don't want someone who has demonstrated how crazy they are as the Islamic Republic in Iran, where they just mowed down something like 36,000 people there, Iranian citizens. And if they're going to do that for their own citizen, God knows they would have no compunction against using a nuclear weapon against their neighbors and people that they perceive as enemies.
The United States of America has become soft. What was it, 80 years ago, we won with our allies World War II. It went on for how many years, Terry? 4 or 5 years? That was a long war. Do you think we had some discomfort? Do you think we had some higher gas prices from time to time and other amenities that we had to suffer through? But now we suffer for 4 or 5 weeks higher gas prices, and suddenly it doesn't matter that they may have a nuclear weapon in Iran. We don't care. It's important that we make sure we don't pay $4 instead of $3.10.
Well, you bring up a point the
gallon.
president brought up, because some reporter was saying that the people have been suffering. He goes, and the president said in this press conference, how long did the Vietnam War go on? It went on for 15 years. And by the way, what did President Kennedy say in his inaugural address, which, we make posters of it? We shall pay any price, bear any hardship. Apparently we're not
Bear
going
any
to bear
burden?
anything anymore. Oh, well, gas prices are up. Woe is us.
Right.
Let Iran have their nuclear program because we don't want to pay for $4 gas. You're right. I mean, I don't know if it's we've grown soft or the people are just historically illiterate and they don't know what the hell we're about and why the United States of America matters on the world stage to protect democracy around the world.
And a lot of this is partisan, sadly. There's almost the entire Democratic Party, almost the entire Democratic Party is on the side of we can't think about national defense. And it's terrible because Trump did it. So even though many of those folks might actually agree with some of these policies of the importance of taking an important national defense position here, no, because if it's Trump, it's bad. And, if it's Trump, it's not necessarily good, not necessarily bad. There's some of both. And you shouldn't, on national defense, importantly, just say it's all political, and that's the way it's become. And the Democratic Party, important article in the Wall Street Journal today by Matthew Continetti, talking about the change that happened in the Democratic Party, which we've touched on from time to time. It's now a pro-Palestinian party. It's now an anti-Israel party. They say it's anti-Netanyahu. No, it's anti-Israel. Israel is viewed as genocide. Doesn't matter if there's genocide coming from the other side. This is the new Democratic Party. Look at the numbers. When 40 U.S. senators out of 47 who are Democrat vote one way, and there are some Republicans who go one way and one way the other, but the Democratic Party is overwhelmingly against Israel.
Jeff, on that very point, just yesterday, Alan Dershowitz, in a Newsmax article, said that after being a lifelong Democrat and a liberal at that, he is now switching and is going to identify with the Republican Party for the very reason you brought up, that he now says the Democrat Party has become a party of the far crazy left that has become the anti-Jewish party. And it was just last week in our show, I asked you, I question why any Jewish voters were still going with the Democrat Party, and asked you if you had heard anything about Jewish voters switching over. You said it was starting, and here we have Alan Dershowitz, one of the more famous people, a Harvard law professor for decades, and now he is a Republican. That is shocking, but it's evidence of what the Democrat Party has now become.
Well, the important thing here, really the most important thing, and the Jewish thing, as you put it, is important. Certainly for Jews who believe in the existence of Israel and realize that there is an existential issue as to whether Israel can continue to exist if the United States as an ally turns against them, as it may be doing, as the Democratic Party is doing. We don't want bias, we want fairness in our country in all things. And in national defense, we have to have a country that realizes the importance of national defense, and we will have to...
And standing by our allies. We're almost out of time. I want to bring up the President Trump fired the Navy Secretary earlier this week. Here is the new Navy Secretary, breaking news, Secretary of the Navy, and he is a son of Vietnam War refugees. Just the kind of thing that is why America is the way we are. But we got to say goodbye for now. Jeff, until next time, we'll see you.